Welcome to the Cloud Pod, where the forecast is always cloudy. We talk weekly about all things AWS, Google, and Azure. We are your hosts,
Justin,
Jonathan,
and Peter.
All right, guys. So this week we're going to do a recap of 2018 and kind of our favorite Amazon, Azure, and Google stories, or just industry general stories. So I know I asked each of you to go and find three topics that you wanted to rank 3, 2, and 1, and we're going to run through those today. And then I do have a couple honorable mentions that I've kind of looked at and said, they're not really top 3 worthy, but I can talk about them because I just think they are sort of interesting to the overall cloud journey. So jumping right into it, let's talk about Peter's number 3.
Sure. So number 3, I went with the Defense Department's JEDI cloud contract put out to bid. And I think the two big takeaways from that one would be the size. $10 billion over several years. And then the other would be that they're giving a winner-take-all, one vendor strategy for that spend, which is interesting. I mean, we look at a lot of companies right now, some going all in on one platform and others deciding to go with a multi-cloud strategy. So here's the government doing all-in strategy and spending a pretty significant amount of money on it, not to mention defense going to public cloud.
Do you find that many customers actually embrace the multi-cloud strategy for more than a migration effort? Do you see that they're actually successful running multiple production workloads across multiple clouds?
I think a lot of people have that as a strategy, and then they're going to start with one because it's too much to digest. But we definitely have some people looking at DR from one cloud to another.
Traditionally, I haven't really found anybody who's running multiple production workloads across multiple cloud providers unless they've segmented a very specific set of workloads. For example, their big data or machine learning to Google potentially, and then their EC2 container workloads to Amazon. Or if they are doing multi-clouds because they chose the wrong cloud provider and they're multi-cloud until they get off the wrong cloud provider as they move to the right one. So it's multi-cloud's really interesting because there are a lot of trade-offs to it, but we could have a whole show just talking about that. But going back to the JEDI contract, do you feel like there's a strong contender to win this deal?
Well, originally there was many complaints that it was tailor-made for Amazon to win. And I know that IBM and Oracle are, I believe, protesting and potentially not bidding.
No, they announced a lawsuit, actually. Early December, they're suing the government over the deal.
There you go. So not many happy cloud providers.
Yeah, it's interesting because, there's been a lot of argument that the JEDI contract was written in the favor of Amazon Web Services and that it's very clearly written for them to win the deal. There was some interesting analysis I saw before the holiday, actually, from Beth Technology, and she basically wrote an article, Why Microsoft, not Amazon, will win the Pentagon contract. And she has some interesting arguments in here. One of them is that the Pentagon in 2014 awarded all of their operating system contracts to Microsoft. And so, if they really want to have a single vendor strategy, do you really want to take all your operating systems and all these things that you have a contract with Microsoft and then go put them onto Amazon? And so she argues that there's a good chance that Azure might win this deal too, which, that's her opinion, and I respect her opinion as well. I think it's still anyone's game, but it definitely feels like Amazon's sort of in the lead on this one.
So what do you feel about Google pulling out kind of over employee pressure and moral feelings over the contract?
It's a problem. Right? You need to kind of decide, like, ethically, what is our company going to do? Google has never been one to be a big privacy company or privacy focused. So it's interesting that they listened to that pressure internally and said, we're not going to bid on this deal because we're concerned about how our technology may be used to restrict privacy or to invade other countries or do different spying techniques. So that's interesting. But then you also look at some of this technology like recognition and you're like, well, if it wasn't going to be used in security applications at airports, what's its purpose beyond a violation of privacy in some way?
I wonder if they ever had a chance. I wonder if their cloud was up to par as far as the DoD was concerned.
Yeah, I mean, they do have quite a few security certifications, but I don't know if they've gone through the FedRAMP process, which is really the key steps to become compliant with the government's requirements. That's why both Azure and AWS have their own GovCloud type data centers that host these things for the government. Yeah, I don't know if Google has done that investment yet, or if that's where they really want to focus their effort. And this, being the number 3 player, they may feel like focusing on enterprise features is the right play versus government features right now.
It's a really interesting one. It almost made my number 3. Bezos said at the Wired conference when he was responding to the news of Amazon selling facial recognition and other technology to law enforcement and the DoD. I was kind of proud that he got up on stage and told people that the country was going to be in trouble if tech companies were going to turn their back on national security.
Yeah, how do you want to fight wars nowadays? Do you want to know more than the other guy?
Yeah, that's interesting. All right, moving on to Jonathan's number 3.
I had a really hard time with my third choice. I wanted to be excited about a lot of things this year. NLB was one, Transit Gateway was one, and I feel like they didn't quite hit the mark when they launched. NLB didn't support cross-AZ communications. Transit Gateway, we've waited for years, and now we can't do region to region. I mean, I feel like the customer experience would have been so much better if they could have waited 3 months and launched it fully featured rather than launching it like this. It's a bit of a disappointment. So I think my third choice is Lambda custom runtimes. People have been waiting for Ruby support and Go support for a long time. And all those things are possible in Rust and anything you like, but the opportunities, I think, extend more than just traditional environments for traditional either interpreted or compiled languages. We start to get into the realm of, well, the runtime could start to be an application in its own right. So imagine the runtime could be JMeter. And then when people upload their Lambda functions, they don't upload an executable function as such, but they can upload a configuration for JMeter. And when they invoke it, it performs the test. So I think these other use cases, which may not have been in Amazon's mind when they enable custom runtimes, are going to be really interesting.
Yeah, the Lambda stuff's quite interesting. And like we talked about in a previous show, is this really the future of where Amazon sees computing going, is serverless all the way? And the support of custom runtimes definitely supports that notion. And I'm excited to see what people do with it.
So do you think that custom runtimes are really going to meet the mark day one, or do you feel like it's similar to Transit Gateway and some of the other services you mentioned that haven't really quite hit the mark on their initial day one, that Lambda layers and Lambda custom runtimes is all brand new? So do you think it falls into the same category?
No, I think this is ready to go. I think they've given a lot of thought to this. It's taken them a very long time to get to where they are, and I'm super happy with what they have at launch.
And we get Ruby.
Ooh. Ruby, I don't know. I'm going to make a Microsoft QBasic interpreter for Lambda or something like that, just for fun. I mean, I've seen a lot of them pop up in the news feed. COBOL's already done.
Oh, wow.
There's a few other old languages.
Just run 1,000 Lambdas to run your mainframe app.
How about yours, Justin? What's your number 3?
Yeah, so I picked Amazon Secrets Manager as my number 3, and I chose it for a couple of reasons. One, it's Amazon's second or third attempt at really coming out with secrets management solution. With Parameter Store being kind of what they did last year, now Secrets Manager being the future. I think it really opens up a lot of use cases that are really important for computing and security, and being able to put passwords and access keys into runtimes, and it really enables a lot of new use cases, as well as auto rotation of passwords. When using RDS, that's a fantastic security control, and something that a lot of customers have strived to do with a lot of scripting and a lot of code and a lot of potential downtime. To have this all kind of taken care of, tied to the metadata service and other things we do with roles, I just think it's a really fantastic service, and so it made my number 3.
Cool. So is it really just a way of hiding those secrets away under the covers of under the protections of IAM?
Well, yeah. So you have the ability to store them into this key store, and then basically retrieve them through an IAM role, or you can just make them not visible at all to an end user and say, look, this is completely managed by Amazon. I'm only invoking it as an alias or a reference, and then Amazon handles all of the display of the password to things like MySQL client. And then as it's getting used after 30 days or whatever period you decide, it auto-rotates that for you and updates both the configuration side and the host system that needs that password.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, I think this is a prime example of why companies go with the all-in strategy. That tight integration of those services that just make it so much easier to get up and running quickly, get the functionality you need.
Other choice you have really in the secret space is Vault. And Vault's a fantastic product too, and I have a lot of respect for the HashiCorp guys and what they're doing with Vault. But if you're all in Amazon and you have this ability to use a built-in tool, it's significantly cheaper, significantly accelerates your adoption curve, and just takes something out of the stack you don't have to worry about. So let's move on to our number 2s. Peter, let's start with you.
All right, number 2, I'm going to go with more contracts. So in 2017, Snapchat announced a $2 billion commit to Google, and that's on top of a $1 billion commit to Amazon over the next 5 years. Yeah, which is it's just amazing to see these contracts getting so huge for, a service which in itself advertises that it's no commitment. So this is voluntary action by these companies seeing real value in committing longer term to spend levels, assuming to get whether it's closer access to the development teams, I'm sure discounted pricing, et cetera. But the reason this is relevant for 2018, actually it was through 2017, they announced it in 2018, that they just barely covered their commit spend on those cloud platforms for that year. So it's pretty interesting strategy to commit that much upfront when we really want to have flexibility on what we spend those dollars on. I guess others could argue it's the perfect amount if they came right up to the edge because they probably got the max discounts they can get. But what do you guys think about, huge commit contracts for cloud infrastructure providers?
Wow, things are changing so quickly. 5 years is an eternity in this space.
So is it a 5-year commit, a $3 billion basically across both cloud providers?
Yeah, it started at I think 400 million on Google and 50 million on Amazon, I think. And then each year ramping up on each of those platforms to the aggregate of $3 billion. Yeah.
For a company that basically did 297 million in revenue in Q3 of 2018 and earnings of negative 325 million off that revenue in the same quarter, that seems like a very large commitment. And I hope those discounts are really making it worthwhile for them to commit to that level. That's a big number.
$300,000 a day across both providers.
Yeah, I think they need to talk to some people like Corey about getting their costs down.
Speaking of AWS, stay up to date with the latest AWS news every Monday morning with the Last Week in AWS newsletter. Corey Quinn gathers the news from AWS, strips out the stuff that nobody cares about, and makes fun of what's left. Subscribe today at lastweekinaws.com. Snark delivered to your inbox. Less fog, more cloud.
That's a lot of money. I think this push from the cloud providers to really lock up deferred potential revenue is really starting to kind of hurt them in some ways. And the days of Amazon announcing 45 price reductions over 5 years seem to kind of be over, with this over focus on long-term enterprise agreement commitments to get better discounting strategies. I think it helps the companies like enterprises that can commit this money, but it's a lot of risk and it's a lot of overhead, a lot of cost management. And, are you not optimizing for costs when you're worried about hitting an annual commitment level? And it's an interesting balance and trade-off that companies must make. And I do question some of the logic in something like a $3 billion over 5 years. It's a huge amount of money. I'd rather be more conservative, get a little bit of a discount, but know it's a number that I'm going to be able to exceed without having to commit money that I don't have or don't need to spend.
Yeah, and also like you said, put some organizational pressure to get from an architectural standpoint, get more value for the dollars you're spending, instead of pressing them to spend up to the limit.
All right, moving on to Jonathan's number 2.
So my number 2's got quite some history to it. If you think about how virtualization has changed over the years, it started off with fully emulated virtualization. Everything was emulated, very, very slow. And over the years, with Zen releases and KVM releases, we've moved more and more of the work back to the hardware layer. And CPU is all virtual hardware. Network I/O is virtual hardware. But things like storage and some of the proprietary interfaces to Amazon technology has been paravirtualized until recently. So my number 2 for this year is AWS Nitro, which kind of has two faces. The first side of it is the new KVM hypervisor, and the second part of that is the custom ASICs, which Annapurna Labs built for Amazon after acquisition a couple of years ago. What the Annapurna technology has done is enabled AWS to move the remainder of these supporting services, which used to be paravirtualized software drivers for storage, networking, and in fact all of the EC2 management functions into Silicon, freeing up the entire host to provide services to the clients, and also enables them to provide bare metal instances, still with a management layer, but I think Amazon is close now to true bare metal performance.
Yeah, the Nitro stuff's quite fascinating. Early days of the C5 were a little rocky as, you kind of see the growing pains of these instances and this Nitro hypervisor really kind of get its feet underneath it. And that was in 2017, and now into 2018. They feel pretty rock solid. They definitely are faster than the C4 counterparts. They definitely have the performance that you want. And go back to some of the keynotes from like Oracle world. They talk about basically their cloud generation 2 and how it's more secure because they're not involved in the hypervisor and all that. They're basically doing what Amazon did a year before. So as much as they're trying to claim this is cloud 2.0, Amazon beat them to it a whole year before that with Nitro. And so it's glad to see that this is something that Amazon's continuing to invest in custom silicone to deliver the computing and the performance that we want. And yeah, if we can get to near bare metal performance without the hypervisor overhead, that's a huge win in virtualization.
Yeah, and long term, I'm sure short term that's going to help margins, but long term, that type of innovation's got to drive price the right direction as well.
Price is definitely going to be a factor, and I think that's why you're seeing performance improvements in the C5 without major price discussions yet. But I think what's allowing them to do by getting the Nitro hypervisor in place is allowing them to open the door to a lot of new technologies, really move software-defined networking and all these different storage-defined networking classes, and being able to do it in a much more scalable, more efficient way.
Yeah, NLB's private link, I would imagine the Transit Gateway service, I'm pretty sure all these things are running on the ASICs.
Moving on to my number 2. So I chose the Bloomberg, the big hack, how China used a tiny chip to infiltrate U.S. companies. And for those who are in technology who don't know about this story, basically Bloomberg came out and accused China of inserting a pencil-tipped sized chip into motherboards being used in Supermicro hardware. It was a huge story when it broke. Amazon came out immediately and said the story was false. Apple came out and said it was false. And basically everyone, even including Supermicro, who had a third party come in and investigate their motherboards, posted a letter on December 11th that, testing finds no malicious hardware on Supermicro boards. So, overall, it's a huge story because if it was true, it would definitely have some impacts to how security works in the cloud and potentially put some companies at risk. But I think at this point, we now proven that this story is false or fake news. But it's really interesting because Bloomberg has really stuck to their guns that this is a true story and has yet to back down from it. But it's a really great, interesting article, and the techniques that they talk about that it could be used to potentially inject malicious code into a motherboard at boot up is really fascinating. Right out of science fiction in some ways, but it is a possible attack vector. It's just the likelihood of it being actually exploited are pretty low, especially if you're doing egress traffic monitoring in any way that you should be doing. You'd be seeing this malicious traffic happening and you'd be able to detect it pretty quickly. But still, a huge story. Would have been really interesting if it had been true and what it would have meant for the world as a whole. But at this point, I think it's pretty proven to be false.
That's a fantastic number 2. I remember hearing that news and being the first 10 seconds horrified, and in the second 10 seconds thinking, that's just bullshit. It's very plausible, and that's the thing why it's hung around for so long. Why they haven't retracted it is kind of interesting. I think in the years to come there'll be some kind of financial analysis on this whole thing, and we'll figure out that there was somebody who's profited from the dip in the market from this.
You've been watching a little bit too much of Billions over the holiday break.
Well, one of the really interesting things that happened after the 9/11 attacks was following the money. I think financial analysis is probably one of the new forensic tools of the century.
When this story broke sometime back in, I believe, October timeframe, the stock went from 21.50-ish down to $12, and it's kind of recovered a little bit, but then it's been hurt by the just overall poor stock market performance in the Q4. But yeah, it was a big story, and it definitely hurt Supermicro in a big way when it first came out. So it'd be fascinating to see if it does tie back to someone manipulating the markets in a big way. But it just seems weird to me that Bloomberg, being a pretty well-respected business newspaper, with all this evidence saying that their story is wrong, Amazon coming out day one saying it was wrong, the fact they haven't retracted it in any way is really fascinating to me. And you have to wonder how confident they are in their sources and what they think they have. But the flip side of it too is that if it is true, right, and the story isn't actually that bad for someone like Amazon. They talk about, this was discovered during the elemental due diligence process, which for those who are following, Elemental was bought by Amazon, is powering a bunch of their video transcoding services. If it's true, then Amazon did the right thing. They identified this issue. They reported to the FBI. They've been on the forefront of it. And Amazon could have come out of this story if it was true and said, look, we identified this in our due diligence. We've completely eradicated this hardware from our data centers and we don't use it. And if it was proven that this didn't happen, or this happened and they didn't do it, that would be devastating to their cloud business overall. So there's really no reason for Amazon to lie about what's in this article, because the story actually doesn't paint them in that bad of a light. I mean, it definitely paints Supermicro in a bad spot, but from Amazon's perspective, if it was true and they found it to be lying, it would be devastating. And I think that's really the most compelling part of the whole story, is that the ramifications of the story being true or not true and how it was handled are really the bigger part of the story, and not the technology, because the technology, like we said, is very plausible.
All the cloud providers, the foundation on which they're building is trust, and if they lose the trust,
Sure.
they'll lose the business for sure.
But it's kind of cool though, from our just from looking at how your instant response was, we would have noticed it anyway because we're monitoring egress traffic. The cloud kind of pushed everybody to do security and implement security in layers. And so the fact that we're on public cloud and we've made those changes makes threats like this, maybe they seem more likely to happen, but maybe they are less likely to cause the massive damage that could otherwise be caused if we were inherently trusting everything below a specific level.
I guess it's become quite an issue as more and more silicon fab plants have moved away from Silicon Valley and the US in general to places like China and India. That the national security does become a threat. I mean, national security uses technology just like everybody else, perhaps more so than everybody else, and to have to outsource production of this hardware now to potentially the people that you're trying to protect yourself against is certainly a conflict. And maybe it's a good reason to bring that kind of manufacturing back to the US.
All right, moving on to our number ones. I want to start out because I think mine's really cool. I think you guys have some better ones. So I was, in researching the 2019 best of or 2018 best of announcements, I was looking at probably hundreds of releases from Google and Microsoft and Azure. And one of the ones that I kind of was just clicking through was Azure DevOps. And, I opened the link in a different tab, and I saw I'll come back to this a little later. And, I was like, yeah, Amazon has DevOps tools, Google has DevOps tools. They all have these tools. So, it's just a Me Too announcement. And so when I actually started to dig into the announcement and kind of look at what they released, I was actually really impressed with the amount of depth that they released in their first DevOps pipeline tools. And it's actually a combination of about 5 different utilities plus a very large extensions marketplace. And it covers Azure Boards, which allows you to do agile methodologies with Kanban or Scrum or different things that you do for that. Because for like a Jira, they have a pipelining feature, which allows you to do Jenkins, CI/CD type workflows tied to Git repos. And they have their own Azure repo service, which does Git compliant repos. And then it also leads into test plans and Azure artifacts. And so you get both the ability to run automated test suites against your pipeline and your code as you build it, but then as well publish those pipelines into an artifactory type repo that supports NuGet and Maven and a couple other technologies in artifacts. So I just overall really impressed with what they released in the DevOps package, and I thought this was a really great article or piece that they did. And this one made my number one for the list just because of the amount of depth they did here, as well as the amount of extensions and plugins that you can now plug into this DevOps service.
Wow, I guess the move into DevOps tooling may explain their acquisition of GitHub.
Yeah, it definitely does fit into that storyline quite a bit when you look at what they're providing here in this tool set.
Even if it was just Me Too, it's super important. You get very little benefit out of cloud infrastructure if you can't easily provision your infrastructure with code and deploy your apps quickly.
Speaking of DevOps, when I think of DevOps in the cloud, I think of Foghorn Consulting. Foghorn has been around since 2008. They've been on the forefront of cloud enablement and have delivered powerful transformations for hundreds of clients, from startups to Fortune 500, including highly regulated industries. They were early visionaries and practitioners of using code to automate infrastructure and operations to drive up cloud efficiencies while driving down costs. Terraform, Ansible, Jenkins, AWS, Azure, and GCP. Go to fogops.io/thecloudpod to learn more about their FogOps services and sign up for a free, well-architected framework review.
Oh, great. Let's talk about Peter's number one.
My number one for 2018, flashing back 10 years ago, perpetual software licenses are losing market share to SaaS applications. Mobile's growing, dominating. Android and Apple are dominating. Microsoft's operating systems appear to be getting less important. Linux is on the rise in the data center. Macs, you see them in the enterprise. All is lost for Microsoft. And then in 2018, where's Microsoft? They surpass Apple to become our country's largest public market cap company. So just incredible pivot by Microsoft, and a way to transform when you're that large of a company to figure out where the market's going and change quickly enough to do that, I think, is pretty impressive.
I think more impressive actually is the turnaround that Satya has done since he took over as CEO in 2014. I mean, if you look at 2012, 2013, and the end of the Ballmer era, it was bad days at Microsoft. No one wanted to work there. They were struggling with their cloud story. They were not really dominating the way they were in Windows and Office. And he takes over in 2014 and becomes more open and changes the entire Microsoft ecosystem to embrace the open, embrace Linux, embrace future technologies, be better on the Mac. And just these last 4 years have been just shocking how much he's changed it. The culture, they've become hip again. People want to work there again. Really a strong testament to what he's been able to achieve at Microsoft in the last 4 years. We talk sometimes about, a lot of the Azure revenue being driven from Office 365, but, that's still a good starting place. And if they can lead that revenue into sustaining long-term growth on the Azure platform, more power to them. I think it's been interesting. I think it's a company to continue to watch for the next several years. Great. Well, let's move on to your number one, Jonathan.
My number one I've waited for a very long time for. I started early on, early 80s, working with computers. When I finally got to the school around, 11, 12 years old, Acorn computers in the UK were very big, right at the beginning of ARM processors. So ARM started as a joint venture between Acorn, who made the BBC computer, Apple, and VLSI, who were the silicon fabricators at the time. And they made the ARM chip, one of the most popular chips nowadays. I mean, there's absolutely billions and billions of these things around. And so I've waited a very, very long time for ARM to appear in the cloud. And this year, Amazon announced another partnership with Annapurna Labs, their Graviton CPUs. And on the face of it, people may say, well, why do you care about this? And I think I care about it for a number of reasons. For a start, the cost. The cost is 60% of the cost of an equivalent C5 class. And the performance for heavily intensive CPU loads like ray tracing, audio processing, video processing is around 95% of the performance of a C5 class. So cost analysis, it's a no-brainer that people should be pivoting their heavy CPU workloads to the A1 class in Amazon. The other benefit is now an environmental thing. I mean, most of these savings that Amazon are passing on to the consumers in this case are going to be based on power consumption. A typical high-performing Intel CPU is going to be 130, 140 watts for that type of performance, and the equivalent ARM CPU is a quarter of that. A 1 gigahertz ARM chip, just serving some basic web needs, on-demand, event-driven, is going to consume a few watts of power. So it's great for the environment too.
I love it. I love it when things that are good for the environment are also better, faster, cheaper, because then they're widely adopted very quickly.
Yeah, I see a trend here in your picks this year that very ARM friendly, very ARM focused in general. You're definitely very excited about this. I'm excited to see what you're going to do with it next year.
I already have a plan to migrate most of the services I have running at my day job from Intel to these A1 class ARM processors.
I'm going to check that out and see if I can swap some stuff over for sure.
Yeah, I haven't tried. I wonder how much software we have to recompile or how much of an emulator there is for x86. I have no experience in this area other than my iPad and my iPhone, which run ARM based processors. But that software is custom written for that and app developers, and I don't write apps. So to me, it's kind of all new. But yeah, I'm definitely interested in seeing more about where this heads over the next year or so. And there's been rumors now for a while that Mac may switch their core infrastructure over to ARM as well, and off the Intel platform. So seems to be the future where a lot of computing's heading. And with Intel not really delivering on the CPU side, what is next? What's after x86 as a platform? And that will be interesting to see. I don't know if 2019 is the year we're going to start seeing those type of things, but 2020, 2021, things are getting different.
Look at the versions, like we're moving to containers. The base OSs are becoming bare bones, right? All of our containers are single purpose, running, starting oftentimes with Alpine. So yeah, maybe we end up with, maybe ARM becomes the new thing, and all we need is a simple OS on that can handle our web services, etc.
There may be some migration efforts involved. Native Java applications would port over just fine. There's a ARM Java runtime. Oftentimes, those Java apps will reach out to native C-compiled libraries, which would have to be rebuilt for ARM. Linux and ARM has been around almost as long as ARM has been around. And so most things, any kind of scripting language, any kind of interpreted language would work out of the box. And it's not a big deal. We're already cross-compiling things for either Windows or Linux.
So you're saying I could run my Ruby on Rails apps today on ARM?
Absolutely.
Perfect.
This may be the last time you appear on the podcast, but absolutely.
Come on. Give my Ruby a break.
Great. Well, that wraps up our top three. But did you guys have any honorable mentions or anything that didn't quite make your top three list that we should maybe mention?
Actually, Microsoft's a really good number one. In fact, one of the things that crossed my mind for my top three was Microsoft joining the Open Invention Network, which is a community that's dedicated to protecting Linux and other open source software from risk of being sued over patents, basically. I think Microsoft's commitment to open source and Linux in general has been really good this year. Providing those DevOps tools is fantastic. And just in the past couple of days, there's been press releases from Microsoft about how Visual Studio is overtaking other IDEs as development environment of choice, even within competing companies like Google.
We didn't even touch on IBM acquiring Red Hat.
I thought about that, but I don't like it. It's certainly news, definitely news, but I don't know what to say with that. I mean, did they buy Red Hat for? I mean, Amazon obviously saw this coming early and pivoted away from Red Hat CentOS to their own Amazon Linux, just as they saw the issues with Sun Java and they pivoted away to their own distribution of Java. The third largest tech acquisition in US history. The first being AOL Time Warner, the second being Dell buying EMC in 2016 for $41 billion. But $34 billion for Red Hat is just an outstanding amount of money.
Yeah, I think they sold high.
So I don't know. It's weird. Did they buy Red Hat for the money they have in the books for support revenue over the next 3 or 4 years, or are they really committing to some kind of big changes in the cloud? I've never seen IBM as more than really a fairly bare metal infrastructure provider. So buying Red Hat's kind of a strange thing to me. I mean, are they going to save money by doing this?
Are they going to retire their own OS?
They have their own OS?
Oh.
No, I'm just kidding. I mean, AIX is a little long in the tooth to begin with, but it's a little interesting to me because when this broke and Red Hat I think it really isn't doing a lot to really move the needle forward for Linux, and I think we've sort of kind of moved beyond the era that Linux versus Windows is so important. With the dawn of containers and microservices architectures and things like that, the operating system becomes just the platform you're building on top of. And so I think Red Hat has sort of struggled to find an identity, and they were getting pretty good traction with the OpenShift product, which is their Kubernetes PaaS layer. And so I think if I was IBM and looking at, they have a pretty traditional software enterprise subscription-based business that kind of fits right into an IBM play. IBM has been trying to do some things with containers with Bluemix for a while, but they're not really getting the market traction. So if you look around, who's providing value on top of Kubernetes? And the one that you'd always would hear would be OpenShift. So potentially IBM sees this as a way to take more market share in the OS space that is sort of legacy, but yet steady revenue, and then also get a really good stronghold into Kubernetes with OpenShift. I think that's their play. I mean, there's really not a lot else there that I think is really valuable. CoreOS was interesting before they got bought by Red Hat, and then I think it's kind of been going the wayside. There's been a couple other interesting acquisitions, Ansible in particular. IBM might be able to do something with that. But, again, while Ansible has a humongous open source community around it, they're not really developing enterprise features there, so it's a little weird for IBM. So I really think it's an OpenShift play, and I think it's a steady revenue stream with the enterprise licenses on Red Hat. But the world doesn't care about Red Hat as much as it used to.
let's talk about the couple that I had. So the first one, Google announced at their conference resource-based pricing. And so this is interesting because it's a bit of a paradigm shift for the cloud in general. Being able to dynamically allocate both CPUs and or memory in any denomination you feel fit, and then pay for that based on that resource-based pricing, I think really starts to change the game for how you think about your compute workloads. And I'm glad to start seeing the cloud providers start doing different things with pricing, because I think the model of on demand and then you can buy prepay RIs to get discounting, that model was one way to do it. I like Google's methodology around the more you run the server, the less you pay for it. I think that's a great model, and I would actually like to see more providers pick up some of that. And this new third model, I think, really starts to change a lot of the game as well. And so excited to see the cloud providers continue to experiment with new pricing models to give more flexibility and more capabilities to the customer base. I definitely think it's up there as honorable.
I definitely think the more flexibility and pricing, the better. When each of these models comes out, it's almost like you can picture the technology capability to provision and track that drove the pricing model in order to ensure that they don't end up, provisioning a bunch of stuff that isn't getting paid for, or vice versa. So yeah, I wonder if more and more flexible pricing models is the result of them better understanding their provisioning models, the scale that they have, making incremental build out less of a risk for them, et cetera. But I bet there's something driving it.
This is kind of like, if you need 20 CPUs and only 4 gigs of memory, you can make that choice. And then my last honorable mention was around Kubernetes. And so 2018 saw both Azure and Amazon announce competing products for Kubernetes in general. So Azure K8 service came out right at the end of Q4 2017. It really GA'd in January, February timeframe. And then Amazon, of course, announced EKS and didn't ship that until about Q2 of 2018. And then even Google is continuing to provide more Kubernetes capabilities by offering a new service called GKE on premises. And so they'll basically manage and run your Kubernetes cluster on premises to continue to simplify the Kubernetes story. So seeing all three hyperscalers now basically all saying Kubernetes is kind of a container platform we need to support and drive, I think really starts showing the power of what Kubernetes is doing in the marketplace. Now, there's a bunch of arguments about, is that market still too fragmented, and is there too many solutions there, and is it too complicated? And that's still to be determined, I think. But the fact that we now kind of come to a point where we can all say Kubernetes is standard across all three hyperscalers, that's a really fantastic move. And it really shows the power of what that open source community has been able to drive since Google released it into the wild 2.5 years ago.
From our perspective, it's one of the highest in demand skill sets that are being requested at Foghorn around just helping people build their own Kubernetes clusters, deploy onto EKS and other services. It's been just ramping at an incredible pace.
Yeah, it's just like the barrier for entry for me is kind of like it's I can't just download it and Docker you can download and run it and do stuff with it in 5 minutes. ECS you can deploy it and you can do things with it in 30 minutes. But I guess to do Kubernetes properly, it needs thought and planning and some prerequisites like PKI infrastructure
and a strong love for YAML files. I find the barrier to entry to Kubernetes to be too high for what it's providing, but it's definitely taken over the world and people are excited about it, and so that's great.
Well, if you do want to try it, I would recommend trying Minikube.
Yes, Minikube is definitely the right entry point.
Okay. And that's it for this week's episode. Here at the Cloud Pod, we strive to bring you the latest news regarding AWS, Azure and GCP, and we're here to help you navigate the world of cloud computing. If you have any questions, reach out to us on our website, thecloudpod.net, or tweet us with the hashtag #thecloudpod.